And we are going to start with the border this evening. And as this is an intricate issue, we have separated this topic into two categories: border security and immigration reform. Mr. Gallego, you were one of the earliest and most emphatic critics of a border wall. Has your perspective changed on that? How much of a role does a border wall need to play in an overall security package? You have 2 minutes.
Well, I think a border wall is important to a security package, but it also has to be coupled with technology, manpower, and then laws that come behind that. So this is why it was important that that the border security compromise bill passed, because it had a lot of those elements. And I have voted for border walls in the past, and actually hundreds of miles with the border walls, because where appropriate, with the proper manpower and staffing, it does work. What doesn't work is when you put a border wall without the manpower and without the actual laws that you need to implement behind it, because it doesn't end up being of any use and it's just costing us more money. So this is why we focus on things such as the border security bill, right? Something that was extremely important. It was a compromise between the most conservative Republicans and Democrats to make sure that we brought some effort. This is something that the Border Patrol wanted and endorsed. It would have brought thousands of Border Patrol agents, thousands of asylum judges, thousands of ICE agents, as well as the technology that we needed at our ports of entries. And this is stuff that I heard from our Border Patrol union. I heard from the mayors that I've visited down there, our county officials, and they needed this and they wanted this. This is why it was very, very sad that Kari Lake came out and was against that bill, even after it was carved off between the foreign policy aid and just solely standing. She was still against it, not because there was a better option, but because she needs it. She needs this to be a border problem, because that solution would have brought a lot of the problems that we have under control. And look, from day one, I've worked in a bipartisan manner when it comes to this. One of the first things I did when I got to Congress, I worked with Congresswoman Martha McSally, a Republican from Southern Arizona, to get veterans to join Border Patrol. Even recently, I signed on to a bill, the only Democrat signed to a bill, Representative Crenshaw of Texas, to get more federal law enforcement, make it easier for them to actually join Border Patrol, something that has been very difficult and something that the Border Patrol agents themselves told me they wanted to be able to do.
Thank you. Mrs. Lake, 2 minutes. Really I'm going to give you the 2 minutes, a full 2 minutes here, to talk about the border wall and can it upstand and withhold without adding extra security and billions on technology.
I just jotted down Ruben's exact quote. He called it the dumb, stupid border wall. He wrote an op-ed that said why we should never build Trump's wall ever. So we're getting the extreme makeover version of Ruben tonight. Ruben has voted against border security every step of the way. Remember, I covered the state for 27 years. I was in your home, and all that time we watched as career politicians said they were going to secure the border and give us border security, and they never did until President Trump came along and actually secured the border, but he had to do it with one hand tied behind his back because people like my opponent were fighting him every step of the way, would not give a penny for that border wall. That border wall keeps us safe. We've seen it here in Arizona because we've seen those areas where the border wall is there and people aren't coming through. Where there are gaps in it, people are pouring through. And Ruben Gallego has supported every step of the way Kamala Harris, the border czar, and Joe Biden's open border policy, which has ushered in 20 million people illegally, including more than 400,000 convicted criminals, and they've done nothing to secure the border. The only piece of legislation that Mr. Gallego has put forth was not about border security. It was about removing the word illegal alien from anything in the federal government paperwork. He's more worried about semantics than our security. And right now, we know that we have terrorists that are coming through. We're worried about a potential terrorist attack on our home soil. We want to be able to go for a jog in the morning like Lake and Riley did and not have to worry about being killed, raped, and murdered. And we're not safe because of the people that have come in. Ruben Gallego has empowered the cartels. I want to finish the border wall. On day one, my first piece of legislation will be to fully fund and expedite the construction of the border wall. It's unfortunate we already paid for the construction materials to do that, but Ruben Gallego and Kamala Harris they sold that $325 million rather of border material for pennies on the dollar. They gave it away. We could have had that wall finished.
Mrs. Lake, in addition to finishing the wall, do you add security and technology? Do you spend on that as well?
Absolutely. I don't think we can do enough to secure our border. It is the most important issue facing Arizonans and facing our whole country. Every state is a border state right now because of this man's policies, this man's votes, which have been 100% open border. He sided with the cartels every step of the way and against the American people. And you and I are suffering because of it.
Thank you, Mrs. Lake. Mr. Gallego,
yeah, I'd like
a minute to respond.
Yes.
And do you support open borders?
Absolutely not. I do not support open borders. A country that doesn't have a border they control is not a country. I absolutely agree with that. And to say that, I've been very proud of making sure that in my time in Congress, I have voted and brought thousands of Border Patrol agents to Arizona, have voted and funded hundreds of miles of border walls where needed, where our experts wanted it. This is why I'm supportive of the border enforcement bill, the compromise bill that was supported by Border Patrol. And Kari Lake, for still no reason why she can explain it, she can't explain it why she was against that bill. Now, this is why we have more support from border mayors than she does. As a matter of fact, there's one border mayor that started with her on the campaign, met with her in front of the border wall with her campaign sign, and now is supporting us because he knows that we're not just talk, we're not just rhetoric. We're here to bring the resources to actually control the border and not just use it as a talking point, which is what Kari Lake does.
Mrs. Lake, a minute to respond.
He voted against President Trump's national emergency on the border. He said the border's not that big of a deal in Arizona when he was talking to people who were donating money to his campaign and said he's not an expert on the border. We need somebody who understands the threat on the border, and I do. And President Trump does, and on day one, we're going to get busy undoing the damage caused by Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, and Ruben Gallego, who's voted with them 100% of the time. Can you imagine voting with the Kamala Harris and Joe Biden 100% of the time, especially when it comes to the border? You know, this isn't just about an open border. We've got 20 million people pouring in. They're taking jobs, they're taking housing. This is why nobody can afford housing anymore, because we're having to compete with people who've come in illegally. I am completely opposed to an open border. I am 100% for legal immigration. My mother-in-law came here legally, and all of the incredible immigrants of this country who came here legally are horrified by the votes that my opponent has taken. They're horrified by what Kamala Harris has done. And by the way, that piece of legislation, thank you for reminding me, I am not for it, and it's because it would codify into law 5,000 people every day coming in illegally. That means 5,000 people every day would be pouring across our border illegally. That law did nothing to stop child sex trafficking. 350,000 children have been trafficked across our border since Ruben Gallego and Kamala Harris opened up that border. 350,000, and they've lost track of them.
Mrs. Lake, let's move to a specific question, please, on that topic. Are there any elements of that bipartisan border bill you would have supported?
Actually not, because it was not done properly. Okay. Listen, here's what happens in Washington, D.C. These guys meet in back rooms. They have an idea. They say, let's put a border deal together. Let's call it the Safe Border Act, whatever they call it, because they always call it something, and it's really usually the opposite. Then they throw a bunch of other stuff in there, and they never get to it. And the problem with this piece of legislation that I had a real problem with, Steve, was that they attached it to $115 billion in foreign money and more money, our money, Arizona's money, going overseas to kill people. And when they couldn't get this passed because there was no bipartisan support, they may have had 3 different people writing it and pushing this, but there was no bipartisan support. 3 people supporting it. The senators were not bipartisan behind it, and in the House they weren't supporting it either. And the people weren't supporting it. So what they did is they separated it out, and Ruben Gallego voted to send another $60 billion to Ukraine. And after he made that vote, he sashayed around the floor of Congress, waving a Ukrainian flag. I want to ask the veterans out there, can you ever imagine standing on the floor of Congress, standing anywhere, and waving the flag of another country? That is what this gentleman did. He sold us out. He sold us out to Ukraine. He spent $260 billion. He's voted for every penny of that, but he would not help President Trump build the border wall. Even when President Trump said to the Democrats, I want to make a deal when it comes to DACA. I want to make a deal when it comes to DACA. Let's make them citizens in exchange for helping me come up with money to build the border wall. And Ruben Gallego and the Democrats said no. They're using these DACA recipients as political pawns. I find that to be disgusting, Ruben. Why are you using them as pawns?
Mr.
Why
Gallego,
wouldn't you make a deal with President Trump?
Let me have you jump in about that, specifically about the Dreamers. What's your level of support?
Actually, I was actually in the room when I was negotiating this with General Kelly, Chief of Staff of then President Trump. But we actually did agree to give the border wall for Dreamers. And then he came back and said, well, now we want to actually take and bring down more legal migration, take out green cards and everything else like that.
That's actually not true.
I was actually in the room, and I'm sorry.
Instead of the 650,000
let him finish his answer first, please, and then we'll...
President Trump tripled it. So
I promise you a rebuttal. I promise you.
But back to this is something that actually she has been avoiding. Why don't we just give Dreamers status? Kari Lake, this whole campaign has dodged what would happen with Dreamers. She talks about deportation, but she'll never answer if is she going to deport the Dreamers in this country, because I don't think Dreamers should be deported. Kari Lake keeps avoiding these types of very, very hard answers. And back to, let's talk about this. The bill was actually separated. So eventually, once from pressure from politicians like Kari Lake, who again just won a border problem, won the day, and a lot of Republicans walked away from a border compromise bill that did have a lot of Republican co-sponsors. They separated it out to actually have a separate bill only on the border, and Kari Lake, again, voted no. This is why she doesn't have support of so many of those border mayors. That's why we actually now have 45 Republicans, former electeds and current electeds, have now crossed over and support us, because they understand we take this serious, not just the campaign rhetoric.
This was going to codify people pouring across our border. And we know, we just learned this week that roughly 35,000 people have poured across who we knew had criminal records. 50 or 60,000 of them were convicted rapists and murderers. This piece of legislation was a disaster. It would have codified catch and release. I do have a solution. It's called H.R. 2, and it will secure the border. That, along with constructing the border wall quickly, which we can do, and then dealing with the people who've poured in during the Biden invasion, the 20 million people who have come in unvetted into our country. We must deal with them. In order to save our homeland, we must send them back to their homeland. I'm talking about the people who came in unvetted in the past 3.5 years. I'm not talking about the Dreamers. I'm talking about the people who came in the past 3.5 years. Them here? Do you want to deport any of the people who've invaded our country in the last 3.5 years, Ruben? Do you want to deport any of Do you want to deport any of them?
30 seconds.
Yes, actually, we should have a proper deportation proceedings. But I also think that we shouldn't deport Dreamers. Kari Lake, again, is avoiding
20 million of them?
There's not 20 million Dreamers. So let's be clear.
Yeah, let's talk about the Dreamers. You had a chance to make a deal.
You have not made clear.
You had a chance to make a deal and you used them as
President Trump right now is saying that he's going to
deport.
She says she's going to deport people. Will you deport Dreamers? Just be honest, yes or no?
No, Dreamers are not. President Trump wanted to make a deal when it came to Dreamers. You said no. Unfortunately, the radical Democrats, like my opponent, would rather use people as political pawns. I want to secure the border, and we're going to do that. And right now, we've watched as people like Laken Riley's life have been snuffed out. We've watched as 100,000 people a year are taken from us because of fentanyl poisoning. And he's allowed the cartels, he's empowered them to continue to funnel fentanyl in.
And Mrs. Lake, I would like to ask, through August of this fiscal year, Customs and Border Patrol reported more than 2 million people caught crossing illegally or deemed inadmissible, 500,000 pounds of drugs seized at ports of entry. What is the bigger threat to you, the flow of migrants or the flow of drugs? 1 minute.
They're both terrible. It's a war against America. We have an invasion of people coming in. And I remember seeing video of they look like soldiers coming in, soldiers from other countries coming in, pouring across our border. And then we have the cartels empowered by Ruben Gallego trafficking drugs into our state. We are the funnel for fentanyl. I have met so many parents and loved ones on the campaign trail who come up to me and they wait usually till the end of an event. You can spot it. There's a sorrow that you see in their face, and they come up to me at the end of an event. And they say, I lost my son. He was 16 years old. He took a half of what he thought was a Xanax pill, and he's not with us. A 20-year-old daughter, a young mother. We are losing a generation of people. We're losing an entire generation of young people, and you should know better, Ruben. You've even said this. You have admitted that you have a loved one who was a convicted felon drug trafficker. who's trafficked drugs into our country.
Mr.
And
Gallego, a minute to
wait,
respond to this.
I want to finish this because I feel for you. You got emotional talking about that, a close relative of yours. And for you to continue to vote to empower cartels to bring in fentanyl, which is a weapon of mass destruction, into our country, you talked about the sorrow.
Mr. Gallego, 1 minute.
He
Go
talked
ahead and
about the
respond.
sorrow he felt from having a family member who trafficked drugs and how hard it was for him. And what you're doing to families right now, Ruben, is you're making that be their reality. You're making it so moms and dads out there are losing people because of drugs. Your
Mr.
votes
Gallego.
on the border have empowered the cartels.
You know, I've taken this so seriously that, you know, I was actually in support of a bill that would have brought more technology to the border, that would have actually checked all the scanners. And by the way, that was in the bill that Kari Lake also, again, stood up and said, do not pass it. Not because it wasn't a good solution, because it would have brought a political solution to an end that she needs. She needs this talking point. You know, I take this so seriously that as a member of the Armed Services Committee for the last 10 years, I actually introduced a bill into it called The Buck Stops Here, which helps us track down the sources of money that goes to fentanyl all the way from China to Mexico into the United States. So I do take this seriously. And again, this is why I have more support from elected officials and leaders in this country and in this state than she does. Border mayors that used to campaign with her are now campaigning with me because they don't think that she's serious about this. As a matter of fact, we have 45 Republicans, again, that aren't campaigning with her. And what it seems like, Donald Trump doesn't want to campaign with her anymore either. He's not allowing her pictures on any of his billboards. So this is what we're seeing right now, a candidate that could only talk but doesn't actually produce results.
Well, Mr. Gallego, one of the impacts that we see that's really being felt by border towns that we heard from in the questions that were submitted by voters is that the hospitals in border towns are spending on medical care for migrants. Food banks have been impacted and continue to be stretched.
That's right.
And so now locals worry that there aren't enough resources left for them. So how do you rectify or regulate the financial impact for those communities, especially when we're looking at both for-profit and nonprofit organizations? 2 minutes.
It's a great question, actually. I've been working for, the last 2 years, especially to make sure that we bring money to our border communities. This is money that's been asked by Yuma County, Santa Cruz County, Pima County,
But you want to
Cochise
put the
County.
money in the NGOs that are transporting people.
We're going to give him his time.
Okay, he wants to fund the NGOs that are
I'll give you a
transporting.
response.
So these communities, including these nonprofits that work with our local communities, are essential to actually making sure that the streets aren't full of men just walking around, right? And so what they do, with the help from us through FEMA, which, by the way, she wants to cut these funds, is we made sure that these migrants aren't affecting these small towns that can't take that impact, and that our local communities, our hospitals, firefighters, law enforcement, ambulances, that they're all reimbursed. Kari Lake, she will do anything and say anything to gain power, including lying.
I haven't had a vote in this. You have had a vote for 10 years, Ruben. Why haven't you voted for Mrs. Security?
Mrs. Lake.
Has said that
In 1 minute.
that we took money from FEMA, that we took money from FEMA for a hurricane, when in fact we appropriated money specifically for those border communities because they were asked for by these mayors. And now she says we should cut that. She says we should cut that. These mayors, so I hope you'll call the mayor of Douglas, the mayor of Nogales, the mayor of Yuma, and say, hey, because I want to earn points with my friends on these right-wing talk shows, I'm going to cut your funds. Because she's lying right now. She's lying that the money that went to FEMA came from that fund. It actually is going directly to them. But of course, it doesn't matter. As long as she gets to get her talking points in and she gets to lie and get power, Arizona, especially our border communities, are the ones that are going to be hurt.
Mrs. Lake, how do you rectify the financial impact for those border communities?
It's
2 minutes.
absolutely horrifying. Hospitals having to close down, hospitals there that aren't being paid because people coming across illegally are getting services and they're not being paid for them. And Ruben's idea is to actually funnel billions of dollars into the NGOs that are actually taking part in transporting people further into our country, not just here in Arizona. Go to the airport. Take a red eye out of Phoenix Sky Harbor. It looks like a migrant encampment because so many people are moving from Phoenix Sky Harbor to all points, all 50 states. And Ruben Gallego has funded that. That's what he wants to do. You know, the real answer, the real solution, Arizona, is not to have to pour billions into all of this, is to shut down the border, build the border wall that he calls a dumb, stupid border wall. Build the border wall, and then, Ruben, we don't have to pour billions of dollars into the NGOs. The real solution to help these border communities so that they aren't taking a financial hit is to finally put the border wall up and get serious about border security. But Mr. Gallego would rather pour $260 billion of your hard-earned tax dollars into Ukraine to fight for their borders, not our borders. I want to protect you. That's why President Trump, my good friend, has called me Border Kari Lake. I love the nickname, and I'm going to go there to Washington, D.C. and help him build that border wall and secure the border. We can't afford what Kamala Harris and Ruben Gallego have done. Can you imagine he's voted with them 100% of the time for an open border? We're not safe because of it. Fentanyl's falling into the hands of our young people. It's affecting our economy. If you're out there working 1 or 2 jobs, when you bring 20 million people in, they're going to work for peanuts, especially under Ruben Gallego's plan, which is to pay for their housing and give them an EBT card with thousands of dollars on it to pay for their food. They don't have the monthly expenses to live, and so they can work for a reduced wage. It brings your wages down, and it makes all of our families have to struggle even more. And ask the police about it.
Okay.
They're struggling because more crime. How many of you out there know somebody, or you yourself, have been a victim of crime from these Chilean gangs, the dinnertime bandits who broke into homes and are terrorizing people here in the Valley?
Okay, thank you. We're going to dramatically change. I'll give you 30 seconds and we'll dramatically change topics. Just 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Well, number one, there's been no hospital that's shut down. This money has actually been requested by the communities. This money has been requested by Nogales, by Santa Cruz. They've asked us to work with these nonprofits to release the pressure that they have. She would literally leave these towns abandoned.
No, I would
have you not visited? Why have you not visited them and talked to them? You've been to Mar-a-Lago more than you have to the border. If you had been to the border and actually talked to these towns, talked to these nonprofits, talked to these mayors, they would tell you, we need this or else we're going to have chaos. But you have you're more interested in the talking point. She wants the talking point and says she wants a solution. And Arizona's going to get hurt. Arizona's going to get hurt.
You have hurt Arizona. I've been to the border
we've
more
given you a
times.
chance on this. We're going
I've been to the border more times than you've probably been to Arizona.
Mr. Gallego, let's switch topics.